In recent years, chronic diseases have become an increasing problem in Nigeria and other parts of the world. One of the most prevalent of these diseases is hypertension. Statistics suggest that this condition affects more than 30% of all adult population worldwide. That is over 1 billion people. It is the main risk factor for cardiovascular diseases, especially coronary heart disease, heart failure and strokes, as well as for chronic kidney disease and dementia. Reports indicate that around half of people living with hypertension are unaware of their condition, putting them at increased risk of avoidable medical complications and death. Today, as the world commemorates World Hypertension Day with the theme, Measure Your Blood Pressure Accurately, Control It, Live Longer, we shall be looking at the issues around this disease. What are the causes of hypertension? Who are most at risk? And how can it be prevented and managed? Well, our guest on this edition of Nigeria Today will give answers to these and other questions shortly. Welcome to the program. I'm Dennis Adegunloye. All right, joining me to give more insights on the topic blood pressure and longevity is Dr. Oladipupo Fason. He is a fellow, West African College of Physicians and consultant cardiologist, Department of Internal Medicine, National Hospital, Abuja. He also doubles as the North Central Coordinator, Nigerian Cardiac Society, and member, Nigerian Hypertension Society. Good to have you on Nigeria Today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's start with the basics. We all have a general understanding of what hypertension is. From my understanding, it's raised blood pressure, but just to elaborate for us a bit more exactly the causes, the warning signs, and symptoms, for example, on this quite preventable disease.
Yeah. Thank you once again. Of course, hypertension is a clinical condition where the blood pressure is higher than an acceptable value, and this value must be sustained. So usually we use a value of 140 systolic and 90 diastolic. And values of 140, 90 and above, if it's sustained over a period of time, is what makes us define anybody with that as having hypertension. Okay. So sometimes blood pressure can go up for certain reasons. There could be an incident that is scary and agitating, and if your BP is taken at that time, it could just surge up a little. Okay. But as soon as you get over that phase, BP should normalize. But when you see an individual that you repeatedly check their blood pressure and the values are continuously elevated above 140 over 90 millimeter of mercury, then we can say that the person has high blood pressure.
All right. What kind of length of time are we talking about for this consistency?
Well, sometimes the length of time could be as short as even 6 hours. Okay. Sometimes it could be longer than that.
So someone who's got higher than these figures that you've given us for 6 hours could be considered hypertensive.
So I mean, the whole idea is to have it repeatedly.
Okay.
So there are instances where BP even can be diagnosed at first instance. If a patient comes up with very high blood pressure values, maybe 160, 170, 180 systolic, and 110, 120 diastolic, with evidence of target organ involvement, affectation of the heart, affectation of the kidneys, looking at the eyes are also affected. You don't need to wait to make such diagnosis. But I'm just talking that in general parlance, in general basic understanding, we are not always in a hurry to label anybody hypertensive, except we've seen those values more than one occasion.
And consistently. All right. Can you just give us a general understanding of systolic and diastolic?
Okay, basically we talk about two values when we talk about blood pressure. And for those who have checked their blood pressure before, the one we usually write on top is called the systolic. And how do we derive that? There are two phases in the function of the heart. There is the period when the heart contracts, and there is a period when the heart relaxes. Now, the pressure generated in the blood vessels when the heart pushes blood out into those vessels is what determines the systolic blood pressure in simple terms. And the pressure that is measured in the arteries at the time the heart is resting is what we term as diastolic blood pressure.
Okay. And what are the different types? Are there different types or stages of hypertension? And would this determine the kind of treatment that somebody would be administered?
Yeah, usually there are different ways we classify hypertension, but in simple terms again, we usually classify hypertension whether it is primary or essential, in which case we don't know why. We don't know why. And this we see in most people who are hypertensive. Up to 95% of people actually that are hypertensive fall into this category. And the other one is the secondary type. So when we say secondary, it means secondary to something that we can identify. So for instance, if somebody has kidney problems, the kidneys play a major role in blood pressure balance, maintenance. So when the kidneys start having problems, BP starts going up. So in such people, we know that the blood pressure is as a result of the kidneys. There are some other instances, some hormonal problems, hormonal imbalances, some tumors even in the body can predispose to, for instance, the adrenal gland is an organ in the body that is just situated, tiny organ situated above the kidneys. Sometimes if it becomes tumorous, I mean, if it develops into a tumor, something we call pheochromocytoma, for instance, is a form of tumor. They release a lot of adrenaline because that organ produces adrenaline. So they tend to release a lot of adrenaline, and adrenaline will shoot up the blood pressure. So those we know. If we investigate the person and we see that, we deal with it. But most times we don't know. So usually if you see a patient, the way we deal with these things sometimes, if you see someone who is quite young, because usually we see blood pressure in the 30s, 40s range. But if you see a 15-year-old or a 10-year-old being hypertensive, we tend more often to think of the secondary causes. But if you say 45-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old being hypertensive, it's more likely to be the essential type. But like I said, in the essential type, we don't know why. But there is often a connivance of many risk factors. And that's where we play when we talk about lifestyle modification. So that is one way of classifying blood pressure. But there is another way of classifying blood pressure in which we look at the severity of blood pressure in terms of the values now, the absolute values. So we use different classifications, but basically we use values such as 140 to 160, the top one, 160 to 180 and above 180. The down one, 90 to 100, 100 to 110 and above 110. And so these values, we can now classify it as mild, moderate, severe. And in more recent discussions in the cardiovascular world, we also look at associated risk factors. So really what we want to talk about when we talk about blood pressure these days is that we don't really look only at those absolute figures. We also look around the person to see if there are other organs that have been involved or damaged, targeted by the blood pressure. And when we use that, in addition to the blood pressure readings, we are able to classically classify the person into mild, moderate, or severe risk, and that determines what we do subsequently.
In terms of treatment. All right. Is there any issue of hypertension being hereditary, or is it something that's pretty much comes about by your lifestyle or circumstances?
Okay, so when we talk about risk factors, there are some risk factors that we cannot really do anything about. and there are some risk factors that we can actually do much about.
Right.
So those we can't do anything about. For instance, I'll start off by saying being a black man, for instance. I mean, you can't change it. I mean, even if you bleach for
yourself.
those that bleach, it doesn't.
You're still black.
Yeah. So in such instance, we know that high blood pressure in blacks is different from Caucasians.
Okay.
Blacks tend to have high blood pressure coming much earlier in the age and being more severe with more target organ damage. So for being black, it's a problem for us, high blood pressure.
Is that being black in Africa, or is it being black anywhere?
Being black anywhere in the world.
Okay.
The other part is the family you come out from. If you come out from a family that has a predisposition, for instance, if a parent, father or mother or both, have high blood pressure much earlier in their life, they transfer some risk to their children.
Right.
It's not 100%, but the risk is there. And it doesn't mean that everybody whose parent is hypertensive and has taken part of that risk will definitely become hypertensive. No. We need to understand the concept of risk. It's not absolute, but it is there. Oftentimes it's less than 50% even. You know, but if you now allow other circumstances to add to that risk which you are already carrying, then you are increasing the chances of becoming hypertensive.
Right. And you said age group around 30 to 50. I would have thought that maybe a 30-year-old having hypertension is a bit unusual.
Well, there is a lot of dynamism going on in the field now. Before we will talk about 40, 45, but we see a lot of younger people, 30, getting hypertensive these days, and there are many factors. Like I said, now we have higher prevalence of obesity. We have a lot of inactivity. People are not as active as they used to be. We now know that people consume more salt than usual, and younger people tend to drink more even these days, and of course cigarette smoking. So if you look at all these things, the younger people tend to do them more even now, and so we now tend to see high blood pressure coming up in such age group more than before.
All right, we'll go for a quick break now, but afterwards we'll talk about what the symptoms are and how people can identify early enough so they can get some treatment. But for now, we'll go on a break. Do stay with us. We'll be right back. Alright, you're welcome back. If you're just tuning in, the program is Nigeria Today. We are discussing blood pressure and longevity. We have Dr. Oladipupo Fasson, a consultant cardiologist, with us in the studio. He is also the North Central Coordinator, Nigerian Cardiac Society, and member, Nigerian Hypertension Society. Alright, Doc, obviously today is World Hypertension Day. The theme is measure your blood pressure accurately, control it, live longer. It seems self-explanatory, but I do understand that getting your blood pressure taken, you can either go to the professional medics, or there is a gadget that one can use at home. Just talk a little bit about those.
So the World Hypertension Day started in 2005 and is organized by the World Hypertension League, which is a body that has different hypertension organizations working together, International Society of Hypertension, and even the Nigerian Hypertension Society, amongst others. So when we talk about high blood pressure, really, this thing that we are using this year is very important and it's key, because for you to see somebody is hypertensive, you must have checked the blood pressure.
Yes.
And so what we're saying is we need to check blood pressures because, as we all know, high blood pressure is a silent killer. It hardly ever gives symptoms.
Right. So people can just drop dead at any moment without any
warning. And if it's going to warn you, sometimes it's too late to react, to respond. If you get any feeling at all, it's just something bad going to happen. So nobody wants that to. We don't want to get there. So the whole idea is to check the blood pressure, for everybody to be aware of their numbers. And checking blood pressure is not enough. It must also be checked accurately, because there are different confounding factors sometimes that affect blood pressure checking. And I must say this, since now that I'm on air, that people should learn or try to get the digital BP monitors. There has been, a lot of times you hear stories where people say, the mercury type, the manual type is better than the digital type. That is not true. The way the world is now, we prefer really
the digital.
To use the digital, as long as you get one that is internationally certified and standardized. And intermittently, you should also take it to your doctor to help you check whether the standardization is still good, because sometimes you can lose that. So once that is sorted, and you get a machine that has the appropriate arm cuff, that is very important, because we are all built of different builds. Some people are bigger, some people are slimmer. One cuff doesn't fit for everybody. So the size of the cuff will also affect the performance of the equipment. So you must get the appropriate cuff for your body size. And when you decide to use the equipment, the machine, you have to use it in an environment that is comfortable. And so a lot of times we prefer people to check their BP at home. And I'll tell you that there are many confounding factors. For instance, we know that checking BP at home sometimes is even more reliable than checking blood pressure in the hospital.
Wow.
Yes.
Because hospital environment can be quite tense.
It can be for some people when they come into the hospital. I mean, the people just goes haywire. I mean, there is an entity we call white coat phenomenon. This phenomenon is simply that a patient whose BP hitherto, whether it's normal or controlled, if the patient was hypertensive, outside that hospital setting, as soon as they get into the hospital and they check their blood pressure, is in the
it's hit the roof.
And there is nothing you can do about that. As long as they're in that hospital, it will be high. Once they leave, they go back home, go and check their BP at home. It's normal again. So as a doctor, how will you know if a patient is in this category if they don't check their BP at home? There are also some other people that just develop some level of anxiety when they come to the hospital. And as soon as the BP is being checked, you find that the BP goes up, their heart rate also goes up. If you don't find a way to calm them down and get them relaxed, you also will get a fictitious value. And that's why we say that before blood pressure is taken, so the candidate must not have taken any stimulant, must not have done any major physical exercise, must have rested for at least 30 minutes without taking any stimulant, no coffee, nothing. And the ambient temperature of the room should be enough, just enough not to get too cold or not to get too hot. And then you sit down on a chair that allows you to put your 2 feet on the floor. Okay, and they are not supposed to be crossed. The 2 feet should be separate on the floor, back rested. The height of the chair should just be enough for you to be able to put your arm on the table. Not like the way I am now. I'm far higher than this table, but enough height to be able to rest your arm on the table. Because when you are taking the blood pressure on whichever arm you are using, The arm is not supposed to be suspended or tense. I see people take BP, the hand is hanging and they are taking BP. No.
False reading.
Yes, the hand is supposed to be rested on the table and you relax, feet on the floor, not crossed, separated, and then the blood pressure taken. And for the rule of thumb, we also advise that BP should be taken at least 3 times in 5 minutes.
3 times?
In 5 minutes.
Okay.
So usually you take it, you wait for 1 to 2 minutes, you take it again, 1 to 2 minutes, you take it the third time. And you look at the values.
Okay.
This we advocate to reduce the error that could come in from taking blood pressure.
Okay.
And that is why we say take blood pressure, but take it accurately.
Okay. What about this gadget that you can wear like a watch? Is that one accurate?
We don't usually advise those wrist-worn ones.
Okay.
Even though in recent times there are newer techniques coming up, and some companies have produced some that they've actually compared to the arm ones, and they've told us that there is not much error in them. But generally, we advocate for the arm cuff.
Okay. And those are can be acquired to use in the home?
They are everywhere.
Yeah.
Actually, they are everywhere, and there are different brands. Just make sure they are internationally certified by. There are different certifying bodies.
Okay.
If you look at the pamphlet, you see it, and then it's you intermittently standardize it. They are friendly, user-friendly, easy to use. You just put them on, and you press the button, and just wait for it to read.
All right. What's your advice to people who might be apprehensive or reluctant to go to hospitals or even check themselves at home for maybe financial reasons, especially when it comes to go to hospital? What are the cost implications for getting blood pressure checks in hospitals?
And cost implications?
It should be free, shouldn't it?
Taking blood pressure is virtually free.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For those who might not be aware.
And you don't need, it doesn't have to necessarily be in the hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, I know nowadays a lot of pharmacies have blood pressure monitors in their settings.
Yeah.
People could easily walk in there and get their BPs checked. And good enough also, this World Hypertension Day is not just a day for us. It's actually a whole month of activities. We go out and check, do outreaches where we check people's blood pressure and let them know, and create awareness and advocacy to let them understand what we mean by high blood pressure.
All right, and for those who, reiterate again this point that early detection is very important. What would be the consequences of those who have not early detected, and what is your advice for it?
Okay, so I will tell you a little story, because we've come a long way. If you go back 30s, 40s, 1930s, 40s to now. So a story, and this is what happened. The former president of U.S. in the 1930s to 1940s, Roosevelt, had a physician who was a rear admiral, and he took it on himself to check his blood pressure every day. He kept a good record. And I can tell you that from around 1936 to 1945 of the D-Day landing, his BP was never normal. Never, not one day. Yes. And on the D-Day landing, he went as high as 280.
Wow.
The systolic. So eventually he had a stroke. And when an inquiry was set up and this physician was asked what happened, he says it came out of a clear sky. So it means, how could this guy have had a stroke? He's been okay all along. So imagine that in 1945 we knew little about high blood pressure, what it can do and how it can lead to death. But today we now know that if your BP is not controlled, there is a risk of stroke, risk of heart attack, risk of heart failure, risk of kidney failure, risk of blindness, even risk of dementia and amputation.
Yes.
Limb amputation. So if we don't know our blood pressure values, we don't check, then we have something catastrophic can happen any moment.
And we don't want that. All right. Very, very good. Always check your BP regularly. All right, Dr. Oladipupo Fasson, Fellow, West African College of Physicians and Consultant Cardiologist, Department of Internal Medicine, National Hospital Abuja. Very many thanks for sharing your expertise with us on this topic.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome, and thanks to you out there for watching. Nigeria Today is live every weekday at 7:30 in the evening. Also watch this and other editions of the program on youtube.com/NTA News 24 Hub. I'm Dennis Adigunle. Thanks for your time.